Heat pressed down on Prescott like a hand on the back of the neck. The depot platform smelled of creosote hot iron horse sweat. Elijah Mercer lifted a square of paper to the notice board and drove the first tack with his thumb. The page curled under the furnace of noon. He pinned the corners flat and stepped back. Missing nurse, it read in block letters. Lila Mercer, last seen in Denver. Any information, inquire at Mercy Street Surgery or telegraph Elijah Mercer. A silver dollar lay in his palm as if it had grown there. He turned it, once saw the sun blink over its worn edge, then let it fall into his vest pocket. It knocked his ribs and stayed. Laughter rose from the stockyard behind the depot. A harsher note carried under it a woman's breath snagged on something sharp. Elijah set his hat, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the noise. Dust spun in the air. Men ringed a flatbed wagon and made space for cruelty. A rope ran from an iron ring to a pair of raw wrists. The woman knelt with her hair stuck to her cheeks, dress-torn, jaw set. A man in a sun-polished frock coat stood over her with auctioneer cheer. "Gentlemen," the man sang, "Dr. Silas Crow has a bargain for your end-of-summer blues." The crowd whooped. Crow smiled and showed teeth. "She eats more than she earns," he said. "Educated, so she talks plenty. Nurse training, useful hands. Price is right." Elijah climbed the wheel spokes and stepped onto the wagon bed. The wood shifted under his weight. Crow looked up, blinked at the gray in Elijah's beard, the stitched sleeves, the flat eyes. "Name your price," Elijah said. Crow tapped the woman's shoulder with the toe of his boot. "Hear that, sweetheart, you are worth exactly 1 silver. That is what a mouth costs that will not hush." Men laughed again. A few spat. Elijah didn't. "Put it in writing," Elijah said. Crow's grin crooked. "You need a bill of sale old-timer care to hang me with it." Elijah reached into his coat, took out a blank form, folded around a stub of pencil. He held the page up. "Your name," he said. "Full." Silas Crow glanced at the crowd. Some men nudged each other, amused. Others went quiet. He took the pencil, scratched his name with more flourish than care, pressed his thumb into the ink pad Elijah set on the crate beside them, left a print black with sweat. "1 silver," Crow said. Elijah let the coin fall onto the plank between them. The metal rang, thin and bright. Crow's eyes flicked to it. Elijah tucked the paper against his chest. "Get down," Elijah said without looking at the woman. "You have work." Her legs trembled when she stood. For a breath, Elijah thought she would fall. She stepped to the edge, searched for ground with her bare feet, and climbed down. They left the stockyard without a word from either of them. The noise dropped away in pieces. A dog barked, a train coughed steam, a fly traced lazy circles around Elijah's hat brim. At the wagon, Elijah set his boot on the hub and cut the rope. The woman flinched at the flash of the knife. His hands were steady. The hemp fell to the dirt. He pointed with the blade to the canteen behind the seat. "Drink," he said. She lifted it, tilted it, and winced as water kissed the open meat of her wrists. The first swallow hurt. The second turned to something like life. "Thank you," she said, voice rough. "Elijah Mercer," he said. She hesitated, then Nora Quinn. He didn't offer a hand. He set the knife back at his belt, climbed up, and took the reins. She settled on the far edge of the bench, small beneath a wad of torn fabric that had once been a dress. They rolled east on a rutted track, the wagon groaning as if it too bore something heavy. The heat lifted a little when they reached cottonwoods on the Verde. Water made a sound that did not belong to towns. Elijah led the team into shade and let them drink, then set about a small camp with movements that had the muscle memory of habit. Nora stood by the river and scrubbed her hands until the water ran clear and pink. Mud slicked between her toes. The skin around the rope burns puffed and angry. She held her wrists in the current and watched reflections shiver. A bent man in a hat, a split of sky, her own face thinner than she remembered still there. By the time she came back, Elijah had a fire going and the smell of coffee pushed at the heat. He set a tin cup on a flat rock for her. Hardtack and a strip of cured meat lay on a napkin as white as anything in Prescott could manage. "I did not buy you," he said. "You handed a coin to a man and he let me go," Nora said. "Feels the same." Elijah sipped eyes on the river. "Buying keeps a man like him on the hook." She set her cup down. "On the hook for what?" "For what comes after paper," he said. "A signature holds better than a promise out here." She studied his hands. They were not a rancher's. The nails cleaned the knuckles, scarred the fingers sure. He checked the wind the way men do who live by small changes in the air. He sliced the hardtack, not to eat but to test a blade's edge. "You were a doctor," she said. He didn't say yes. He reached for the kettle and poured. 10th Kansas Infantry," he said after a moment. "Long time ago." "Not so long," Nora said. He set the kettle aside. The fire made a hollow pop. Somewhere down the river a bullfrog announced himself. "How long were you at Crow's place?" He asked if that is where it was. 3 years, she said, near Canyon City. He called it a homestead. It never felt like a home. What did you do there? What you think, she said, whatever needed doing. Her eyes shifted past him to the chalk of the bank. Words crowded behind her teeth and did not come. Elijah did not press. He reached into his coat and pulled a worn envelope tied with a string. He untied it and unfolded a letter thin as onion skin. The ink had bled where tears or rain found it. He smoothed the creases with his thumb as if the touch could make time lay flat. "She wrote me from Denver," he said, "the Keene Institute for Neurological Studies. Judge Alistair Keene's money. She said people disappeared. She said there was an East Wing, a doctor there who kept to himself." He watched Nora's face without making it a challenge. The fire showed the edge of her cheekbone and a faint bruise blooming on the jaw. "You know that name," he said. Her lips pressed, then released. "Silas Crow," she said softly. "The man on the wagon. He traveled. He talked like he owned every room. He brought a crate to the ranch once with bottles that smelled like a dentist's office and made the old man scream for hours." Elijah folded the letter and slid it back against his chest. "Your Lila," Nora said. "What did she look like in the last piece of paper you have?" He did not answer with words. He took out a sketch, strong jaw softer at the chin, hair pulled back, eyes that had not learned to be afraid yet. Nora looked at it and nodded because it was easier than saying anything else. "Why give me a gun?" Nora asked. "If you think I know something you want, why not make me say it?" Elijah wiped the rim of his cup with his thumb. "Because men who believe ends make means noble are the reason I cannot sleep," he said. "Because pain makes poor truth." He opened a small canvas bag and pushed a derringer toward her. The metal caught the light like the coin had. "You know how to use it," he said. "My father liked to shoot tin cans off the fence," she said. "I kept his company." She curled her hand around the grip and felt a cut of herself return. They ate in quiet. The sun slid behind a cottonwood and turned the leaves to coins, silver along their edges, green within. A freight train sounded somewhere out of sight, a long steel throat clearing. "You can leave," Elijah said. "There is the road, there is the river. I will not follow." Nora watched the current the way it took a stick and made a path for it without asking. Her wrists throbbed with a dull song. The derringer rested heavy in her lap. A white cloud came and made the water dark for a moment, then passed on. "What work?" she asked. "Finding a door," he said. "Opening it." She looked at him, at the tired angle of his shoulders, at the careful space he kept between them. The coin in his pocket ticked against his ribs when he moved. When he spoke the name of his daughter, it sounded like a prayer he did not believe. "All right," Nora said. "North." They hitched the team at dusk and took the trail that paralleled the rails. The sky went purple under the weight of evening. Bats stitched the air over the river. The depot lanterns behind them came on one by one, until the town looked like a rough necklace thrown over a throat. As they crossed the last yard of town dirt, the whistle blew from the far end of the track. Men on the platform lifted their heads. Among them, a figure in a gray coat turned his face and followed the wagon with his eyes. He did not speak. He simply watched until the team and the dust swallowed the tail of the cart. The coin in Elijah's pocket struck his heart again. He clucked to the horses and the wagon rolled into night. Night found them in the hills where the air cooled and the wagon wheels sang against rock. The road climbed toward a line of darker black against the sky. Wind came down smelling of pine and soot. When they reached the pass, Elijah walked beside the team to spare the horses and keep blood in his legs. Nora sat with the derringer in her lap and the canteen at her feet. She watched sparks leap from the iron rims every time they bucked a rut. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called thin and hopeful. They slept a few hours under a tarp near a stand of fur. It was the kind of sleep that held the body more than it held the mind. Before dawn, Elijah saddled up, and they took the last miles into Colorado with the sun working over their shoulders. Denver rose from the plain like a promise written in brick. Chimneys worked all afternoon. Streets ran full of wagons and drays. Men in vests hurried with ledgers pressed to their ribs. Women in bonnets moved in twos and threes with baskets and parasols. The smell under everything was coal-wet stone and carbolic from the hospitals. Elijah pulled into a narrow lane off Larimer Street. A man with round spectacles and a careful mouth waited by a back gate. He had the posture of someone who had spent his life standing over beds and tables, leaning just enough to see without casting a shadow. "Julian," Elijah said. "Thought you would be taller," Dr. Julian Pike said. The corners of his mouth made a short attempt at a smile and then let it go. He looked at Nora's wrists and at the way she held her shoulders, not at her face. "Come inside." The house smelled of starch and dust and something green that might have been linseed oil. White sheets covered furniture like shy ghosts. Pike shut the back door and drew the curtain with 2 fingers. He set a kettle on and opened a tin of salve. "Sit," he told Nora. "If I ask questions, you can say yes or no. That will do." He worked with a light touch. The salve smelled of camphor. It turned the red heat around the rope burns to a more reasonable color. He wrapped gauze around both wrists and secured it with neat square knots. "You have a steady hand," Nora said. "I am competent," he said. Elijah stood near the window and watched the alley. He spoke without turning. "The Institute." Pike wiped his hands on a towel. "Keene's name is on the deed. Crow runs what he calls research. They dress the place fine. Marble lobby, high windows, electric lights in part of the building. Donations buy respect faster than whiskey." He set the towel down. "They are light on nurses at night." Nora looked at Elijah. He did not nod. He did not shake his head. He let the silence hold the weight. Pike studied her face at last. "Can you walk into a room full of men who do not see you and make them see what you want them to see?" "I am still here," she said. He opened a cedar chest and pulled out a dark skirt and a plain bodice. "My sister's," he said. "She married a preacher and moved to Pueblo. She will not be offended." He added a white apron and a nurse's cap kept in paper. "We can clean these lines off your face," he said, and took a damp cloth to the dirt on her jaw. He handed her a small mirror from a drawer. "Comb is on the washstand." In the back room, Nora washed. Soap bit the tender skin around the gauze. She parted her hair and pinned it close. The person in the mirror came into focus as she went. The dress fit like an argument she had already won. When she came out, Elijah had shaved and changed his shirt. The suit he wore had been folded too long, but it hung clean and straight. He looked like a physician who could knock on any door and be admitted. Pike walked with them to the corner. The Institute stood 5 blocks away, a building that looked more like a courthouse than a refuge. The brass plaque by the front steps read, "Keene Institute for Neurological Studies," in letters you could not ignore. Gas lamps showed the marble to good advantage, and the wide doors opened without complaint. Inside, the air changed. The clean sting of carbolic and lye lived under a top note of starch and old sweat. A nurse at the front desk looked up from a ledger. She had gray threaded through her hair and a way of moving that kept paper edges square. "Miss Doran," Pike said, "this is Eleanor Quinn, St. Louis Mercy, trained, strong stomach, looking for night work." Miss Doran looked at Nora the way a carpenter looks at a plank. She did not smile. "References," she said. Pike set a folded paper on the desk. "My hand," he said. Miss Doran read without moving her lips. She put the paper on top of another that had come to her from management, and the two together seemed to agree. "We are short," she said. "Cholera cases from the river camps. 3 men in restraints who bite. 1 child who shakes at all hours. Night work," she repeated as if the word had a texture and she meant to feel it. "Do you faint?" "No," Nora said. Miss Doran lifted a bell, and a girl in a blue dress came at a run. "Take Miss Quinn to Ward B for orientation," Miss Doran said. "Dr. Crow is in house. Judge Keene may make rounds." The corridor swallowed them. Floors of marble near the front gave to oiled wood. The light softened. Sounds stacked against each other. Rattle of wheels. The wheeze of a bellows. Laughter from 2 boys scrubbing a bucket that turned to quiet when they saw the caps. Ward B smelled of menthol and boiled linen. Beds lined both walls. Faces rose at their passing and fell again. The head nurse, Mrs. Hollis, had a jaw you could tie a knot against. She gave Nora a basket of glass syringes and a list of doses. "Use the labeled vials only," Mrs. Hollis said. "The others wait for the research wing. You do not touch those." Her eyes measured Nora as if to see if curiosity came standard with the model. Nora kept her face neutral. She learned the drawers and the order of them. Bandages here, tonics there. Waxed thread in a tin. Quinine under lock. She moved as if she had always moved that way. When a man coughed up blood, she turned his head and cleared his airway without comment. When a child clutched at her skirt, she put 2 fingers on the girl's wrist and counted a pulse and said slowly. Halfway through the watch, Nora carried a tray past a junction and looked down a long corridor that ran toward the back of the building. At its end, a door shone like a coin. Brass lock. New hinges. The light beyond it was not gas. It fell flat and bluish through a small window set high in the frame. A man in a white coat stood with his back to her, speaking to another whose beard flashed silver. The man with the silver beard turned. Judge Alistair Keene wore a suit that did not wrinkle. He looked at Nora the way he looked at a smudge on a lens and then away. Dr. Silas Crow did not look away. His gaze moved over her face and down to the apron and the cap. It paused and set like plaster. He stepped closer. New Crow said. "Yes, Dr. Nora said. Miss Quinn." St. Louis, he said. He said it like a fact about a weather system he had read in a paper. We encourage efficiency. Yes, doctor, she said. Keene nodded to Miss Doran when she appeared at his elbow. Good, he said, and drifted past Nora, as if she had been built into the wall. Back in Ward B, Nora set syringes on a tray and listened to the sound of the building. Under the coughs and shoes and covers moving on sheets came a hum. It sat low in the floorboards like a bee trapped in a glass. When a lamp flared and steadied, she saw that the hum belonged to wires that ran in the walls near the back wing. On a pass through the supply closet, she found a drawer of bottles with numbers in a neat hand and no names. The handwriting had a secure slope to it. Under the bottles lay a ledger with the same hand in the margins. B moved to CC to East, discharged to County, but the note for personal effects said still in storage. She shut the drawer without taking the breath that had asked for itself. A young lab assistant in an apron too large for him almost collided with her at the closet door. He stuttered a sorry and ducked his head. His badge read Edgar Vale. His eyes jumped when someone said East Wing farther down the hall. The tray in his hands rattled. Careful, Nora said. Yes, he said, and tried to smile. It looked like a window that had not been opened in a long time. Near the end of the watch, Miss Doran found Nora by the chart desk. She had a brass key in her palm and a sheet of assignments under her thumb. Change, Miss Doran said. Dr. Crow has requested you for East Wing. She set the key on Nora's open hand. It felt cool and heavy. Oil from years of fingers had made it shine in odd places. Miss Doran led her down the long corridor. The sound changed with each step. The hum grew louder. The air took on a pinch of ozone like air around a storm. At the end, Miss Doran put her own key into the first lock and turned it. The tumblers settled with the soft satisfaction of machinery doing what it had been built to do. She nodded at Nora's key and at the second lock. Nora fitted it and turned. Metal on metal. A click that seemed to run up her arm. The door opened. Cold light pooled over the tile and reached for her shoes. Miss Doran stepped aside. Nora crossed the threshold. Cold light met Nora at the threshold. Tile ran in clean grids under her shoes. The air held a bite that prickled the inside of her nose. Somewhere behind the walls a coil sang. Miss Doran handed a slate and a pencil to Nora, then left with the economy of someone who disliked that corridor. Dr. Silas Crow waited beside a steel table as if she had arrived late to a lesson. His coat was spotless. A watch chain drew a neat line across his vest. He did not offer greeting. You will document pulse respiration temperature, he said. Every 60 minutes. Note agitation. Note coherence if speech occurs. Do not enter chambers without direct instruction. Nora made the pencil ready. Crow turned to a glass wall and pointed without touching. Subject 1, he said. Initial phase. Yesterday's dose. A man lay strapped light to a bed, breath noisy, even with the mask. Bruise rings framed the contact points on his temples. Crow moved 2 panes along. Subject 3. Mid-protocol. 2 weeks. A girl no older than 20 stared toward the ceiling as if she could read something there. Her lips moved without sound. A line of drool left a wet comma on her chin. He stopped at the last lit room. Subject 6. Anomalous resilience. Near a month. The woman in chamber 6 had hair that had not lost its copper even under that light. A strip of cheekbone showed between bandage and mask. The left wrist lay turned just enough to show a small oval birthmark near the bone. The hand itself had the long, clean fingers of someone who had written often. Nora did not change expression. She placed the slate against her belly, not to hide it, but to find a place to hold her breath. Compound H7 is administered only by senior staff, Crow said. You will see the effects and not the cause. This is sufficient. He handed her a leather folder. Inside lay charts marked in an elegant slanted hand. Numbers looped without hurry. Margins carried words that used more Latin than kindness. Success, he said, manifests as increased neural activity accompanied by systemic decline. He looked at her as if expecting a question. Nora let the blank of the slate show in her face. Good, he said. You will learn faster by doing. Assistants in aprons drifted through wheels, whispering under their carts. Edgar Vale moved differently from the others. His tray rattled a note under his steps. When he reached the far counter, he steadied the glassware with both hands and looked at nothing for a full second before remembering how to look busy. Nora began rounds. She set the slate on a high rail and took a pulse through the leather strap at Subject 1's wrist, counted the rise under her fingers, recorded it. Respiration fogged the mask. She noted the fog, the cadence, the small delay between breath and exhale. She matched her own breath to it for 1 count, then broke away. Subject. 3's pupils widened and narrowed like shutters. The girl looked toward the glass and then threw it to someplace that had nothing to do with rooms and wires. Nora took her temperature and wrote the number. Her pencil made a dry sound on the slate. She did not look up when Crow passed behind her. At chamber 6, she stood with both hands inside the square of cutout glass that allowed touch without entry. The skin under the mask had that wax of fever that had gone too long. The hair lay braided against the pillow in a rope that looked too heavy for the head that wore it. Nora placed 2 fingers against the artery at the jaw and found a rhythm, quick but not frantic. Stubborn. Lila, she said, but only with the shape of her mouth, not the sound. She moved to the desk and opened the folder. The pages for Subject 6 reached farther than the others. Entries came in a tidy parade, spike following dose, drop following spike, a line that had not leveled for weeks. One page carried different ink. Subject retains recent memory despite organ decline. Patient identifies staff by name. Speaks of street names not given in intake. Consider extension at patron's request. Words in pencil in the margin read, host apparatus moved to lab 2, ready by midnight. Nora closed the folder and kept her hands still. The coil's hum sounded louder now, or the idea of it pulled sound up to meet it. She found a drawer labeled with numbers and checked the vials inside. H7 sat in a dark bottle with a stopper tied by twine. Next to it, a second bottle held clear liquid with a smaller label. The script matched Crow's. The number matched Subject 6. She chose a second drawer across the station and lifted a labeled stimulant. She slipped it into her apron pocket and set the drawer back the way it had been. Edgar Vale brushed past with a basket of bandage rolls. A folded envelope lay half out of his apron pocket, white against dark cloth. Nora caught it with 2 fingers. "You dropped this," she said. He blinked as if someone had turned the light up. He took the envelope, turned it over. Blank. He opened it and stared at paper that held no words. "It is nothing," he said, and tried to hand it back. "Not that one," Nora said. She drew a second square of paper from her apron folded tight. "This is the one. Read it where no one watches." Vale's throat worked. He slid into the sling of a door half open to a utility closet. He came out with a face that had learned new knowledge too quickly. "You cannot be loud with truths like these," Nora said. "They break walls." He held the note near his chest. "Lila Mercer," he whispered. "Alive. East Wing. Midnight. Keene and Crow present." He looked toward Chamber 6. His eyes went glassy the way boys' eyes go when they watch something bad happen and cannot stop it. "I knew her face from the day she arrived," he said. "She worked here. She asked questions. I should have spoken." "You can speak now," Nora said. "A man will be in the main corridor in a blue scarf. Tall. Reads everything like it owes him. Brush his arm and give him this circle of paper. Nothing more." Vale swallowed. "Miss Doran will want me on hand. She will want fresh gauze more." He tucked the square under the edge of a roll where his hand could hide it. He slipped out with the burden of a simple errand and the look of someone who had decided how much fear he could afford. Nora returned to Chamber 6. She lifted the mask a fraction and slipped the stimulant under the tongue. She smoothed the braid where it had flattened. She adjusted a strap by one hole because the skin under it had gone white. "Wake easy," she said without moving her lips. "When the room moves, follow my hand." On the hour she marked numbers with a hand that did not shake. Footsteps came and went. The hum shifted, rose, settled. Somewhere a bell chimed once and then fell silent. Vale returned after what felt like a long inside of a minute. He gave the smallest nod a man could give and still have it seen. His tray now held gauze, and the roll on top had lost its corner of paper. Visitors arrived as the clock in the far hall touched 10. Their coats did not carry the dust of Colorado. One had a beard slicked with oil that made it catch the light. The other wore a cravat tied so tight his face had the color of clay. "Professor Vogel," Sir Barnaby Whitcomb Keene said, and shook their hands like contracts. "Gentlemen, a tour before the main event." Crow explained controls and devices. He used phrases that turned hurt into measurement. He spoke without sounding excited. He sounded satisfied. They stopped at Chamber 6 and looked at Lila the way men look at land they plan to buy. Keene watched the visitors, and not the woman. Crow lifted the folder and tapped a page with his knuckle. "Anomalous," he said, and gave the word his thin smile. "Useful." Vogel spoke in a smooth German that caught on the hard consonants. "You are certain the apparatus is ready." "Precision is the point," Crow said. "We delay for nothing." Security drifted closer. 2 men in plain suits took places by the door as if they had always been there. A third moved behind the desk and watched Nora without looking like he watched. Nora finished her round and returned to Chamber 6. The stimulant had warmed the skin under her fingers. Lila's eyes fluttered. The lids lifted a fraction. There was a spark of attention, not much, but a spark. Nora angled herself so security could not see lips behind glass. "Lila," she said with breath and not voice, "you have a father who is stubborn. Listen for my count." The lids fell, the coil sang. At 11, the assistants washed their hands with unnecessary care. Crow changed coats. Keene checked his watch and nodded once a man pleased that time had kept its promise. Vale drifted past Nora and touched the back of his hand to his lips. There was sweat there. There was also relief. "Your friend reads like he breathes," Vale whispered without moving his mouth. He took the paper with his palm and did not blink. Nora wrote numbers on the slate. She did not look at him. The last half hour condensed. Small tasks multiplied and got in each other's way. An orderly rolled a polished gurney from a side room and parked it with care. An assistant brought a covered tray and kept a hand on it as if it could float. Someone drew curtains where there had been none. At 11:30, the hum cut out and returned sharper like a string pulled tighter. Light in the ceiling turned colder. Crow signaled to a pair of assistants, and they unlocked Chamber 6. Nora stood at the head and watched the movement of hands and straps without entering. "Prepare the subject," Crow said. They lifted. Lila slid the sheet and the body as one to the gurney. Her chest rose in short, hard breaths. The stimulant sat in those breaths like a small, hard seed. An attendant reached to check the mask. Nora caught his wrist with 2 fingers and pointed to a tiny fold on the hose. "Leak," she said. "Seal it or your numbers will lie." The attendant found putty and smoothed it. Crow did not notice. He had turned to Keene to murmur something about amplitude. Nora leaned to the ear under coils of hair. The ear had a freckle on the rim. She put the rhythm in the air between them. "In for 2, out for 2, she said, and felt the pulse under her thumb try to catch it. The clock near the door clicked at the minute. The hands met at 12 without kindness. From the far side of the building came a sound that did not belong to hospitals. A shout, another, the crack of glass. The first ribbon of smoke slid under the corridor doors and made a low ceiling of gray. Someone yelled fire in the west corridor. Nurses began moving with purpose. Orders broke across the hall like waves. Keene turned fast enough to show fear. "Seal East Wing," he told the nearest guard. "No one in, no one out." Crow set his hands on the gurney and pushed. The coil climbed to a sharper pitch. Security reached for the door locks. Nora put her hand on the rail. Her other hand found the cold weight of the key in her pocket. The room held its breath. The door to the service corridor stood behind the cabinets with its plain face and its plain promise. Smoke moved across the ceiling in a slow gray sheet. The hum in the walls tightened until it felt like a wire pulled between teeth. Guards worked the door bolts with jerks that showed too much wrist. Keene stood with his chin high and his eyes hard. Crow had both hands on the gurney and his mouth set. Nora slid her palm along the rail. The key in her pocket felt like a coin under fabric. She looked at the seam where the cabinets met the wall. A plain door hid there painted the same color as the plaster. Vale caught her eye and let his own glance fall to that seam, a quick mark on a map. A crash sounded far off glass on tile. A shout. The smoke thickened and picked up the bitter taste of varnish. The nearest guard turned his head to listen, and that was enough time for a small steel dart to find his neck. He staggered, blinked at the air, and folded to the floor without drama. Elijah stepped through the service door with a rifle held easy against his shoulder. Dr. Pike came behind him with a leather case in one hand and calm in the other. 2 men moved with them, coats open, badges bright at the vest. The one in front had a scar along his jaw, like a thin white thread. "Nobody moves," Elijah said. He spoke like a man measuring out medicine. Even the coil in the wall seemed to listen. Keene drew himself taller. "You have no authority in this wing." The badge with the scar did not blink. "U.S. Marshal Asa Grant," he said. "You are Judge Alistair Keene. That is Dr. Silas Crow. You are detained for kidnapping, unlawful confinement, murder, and transport of persons for illicit experimentation under color of law." Crow's lips lifted at the corner. Strong words for a barn fire. Elijah reached into his coat and set a folded page on the nearest steel tray. He placed a silver dollar on top of it. The coin rang against the metal and went still. Ink lines and a thumbprint showed under the tremble of light. "You remember signing that?" Elijah said to Crow. Some of the nurses turned to look. Miss Doran stood in the doorway, her face flat as slate. Keene glanced at the paper and then away, as if his eyes might dirty if he looked too long. "Remove the subject," Crow said to the attendants. "Proceed to Lab 2. "No," Grant said. He nodded to his men. They moved to the ends of the gurney and planted their boots. The coil whined. Smoke drifted down the hall, now thicker at the far end, thin ribbons here. Nora stepped to Lila's head and checked the mask. The skin at the temple had turned the yellow of a candle left in heat. The pulse under Nora's fingers jumped like a caught fish and then stuttered. The stimulant had done its part. Withdrawal had come to do its own. Dr. Pike opened his bag and took out a small vial and a cloth. He spoke low. Her body is lean to H7. Move her and she breaks. Keep her and she is used. Elijah did not take his eyes off his daughter. Choose Pike. We keep her alive long enough to reach clean hands and air, Pike said. I can blunt the worst of the fall for a short time. Not here. Keene lifted his hand and made a gesture that belonged in court. This is a medical facility, Marshal. Your men set a fire. People will die for your vanity. Grant's gaze did not leave Keene's face. My men are in the yard. Your fire teams are already inside. I heard your orders to seal this wing. You will not put the dead on us. Sir Barnaby Whitcomb took a step back and his coat opened on a pistol. He moved like a man who had fired at birds, but not men. Professor Vogel's eyes went cold. He did not reach for a weapon. He watched for an opening. Whitcomb raised the barrel. Vale saw it and made a sound the size of a breath. Nora turned the gurney a fraction to take Lila's head out of the shot's line. The report barked in the glass and tile. A marshal jerked blood at his sleeve. Grant swung and put a bullet in Whitcomb's hand. The pistol clattered and slid under a cart. Miss Doran stepped on it with the heel of her shoe and kept it there. Crow took that moment to let go of the gurney and move. He slid along the wall toward a side door that looked like nothing and led to everything. Elijah pivoted, rifle up. Crow ran. Nora drew the derringer from her apron. The world narrowed to a small iron bead and a shoulder blade in motion. She pulled steady and the gun kicked low. Crow spun with a sound like surprise. Red spread through the coat. He dropped to one knee, grabbed for the handle, and fell sideways. Elijah crossed the space in 3 hard steps and put the rifle's sight on Crow's eye. He did not fire. Grant reached him and cuffed Crow with a click that sounded final. The doctor lay panting on the tile, not looking at anyone. Keene had stopped talking. Pike leaned over Lila. He drew a measured dose and pushed it into the line. Lila's chest hitched. Nora laid her palm at the sternum and felt the rise. The coil complained. Lights flickered and steadied. Smoke found their level. Move, Pike said. Grant tipped his head. Which way? Nora nodded toward the seamless door behind the cabinets. Vale had it open already, shoulders set and jaw tight. The door swallowed light. The air beyond it had the chill of stone and the taste of dust. They rolled into the service corridor. The noise from the main hall softened to a distant mess. Pipes ran along the wall and sweated from heat. Water dripped in a steady beat that kept a kind of time. Their wheels made a low rumble that matched the drip. The gurney barely fit the width. Pike walked at the head and kept a hand on the mask. Nora counted the breath for Lila and pulled the oxygen bag when the chest hesitated. 1 and 2, she said, soft and regular. Elijah moved on the right side, close enough to brush his shoulder against the wall. He did not take his eyes from Lila's face. His left hand ran down her forearm as if touch could be a tether. The silver dollar knocked his ribs with each step. They turned a blind corner and met a locked grate. Vale had a ring of keys from nowhere. He sorted them by feel quick and sure and chose one with a notch worn down. The lock fought, then gave. They pushed through to a stair that dropped 2 flights to the laundry. At the landing, a boy in a canvas apron stood hugging a sack. His eyes were too large in his face. Grant lifted his badge. Out, he said. The boy fled. They reached the yard door. Night pressed cold against the glass. Snow had not come, but the air had a clean edge. Pike checked the line again. She is coming light, he said. Hold the head. Nora cupped the back of Lila's skull and kept the chin clear. Lila's eyelids fluttered. The eyes showed white and then brown, then focused without knowing on the plank of the door. Elijah, she said nothing more. The word came like a thought said out loud. He said her name as if saying it could pull her weight. Grant looked through the pane into the yard. A wagon waited with its canvas up. 2 marshals stood at the tail. One had his arm tied off above the blood. He held himself straight and pale. The other watched the door with a pistol at low ready. The alley smelled of wet brick and horse. In the distance, bells clanged different sizes and tempos, a clumsy orchestra that still found the beat. Grant opened the door. Cold came in a wave. Smoke slid past them into the sky. They lifted the gurney and bumped the threshold. The wheels caught and then took the yard. The marshals at the wagon dropped the tailboard and shoved bundles aside to make a space. Pike climbed in and held out both hands. Nora passed the head. Elijah and Grant took the weight at the middle and foot. They moved as one without speaking. In the light from the yard lamp, a sheet of soot showed on Nora's fingers where she had touched the rails and door. It had already found the folds of the gauze at her wrists and made new shadows there. She wiped nothing away. Inside the wagon, Pike propped Lila with blankets and set his case by her hip. He listened at the chest and nodded once. "Keep her warm. Keep the air steady," he said. "I can slow the fall, but not stop it here." Grant looked back toward the service door. Figures moved at the edge of the yard. One of Keen's men had found a way around. A muzzle flashed. The shot rang wide. A brick above Grant's head spit mortar. A marshal returned fire. The figure fell into the dark with a grunt and a clatter. Miss Doran stepped into the yard with a pail. She did not look at the bodies or at the guns. She threw water along the sill to keep embers from finding purchase, and then went back inside without asking permission from anyone. Grant climbed to the wagon's tail and spoke to Elijah. "Can you hold her?" Elijah had one hand on Lila's shoulder and the other on the rail. "I can." Nora climbed in backward. Vale stood at the door with his hands open like a man who had done all he could and did not know if that counted. Smoke framed him. Light made his pupils small. "Go," Vale said. Grant touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat and then signaled the driver. The horses leaned into the traces. The wagon started. Wheels hit ruts and settled. A shadow peeled from the yard wall and lunged at the rear board. Nora planted the ball of her hand on the man's face and shoved. He clawed at the edge and caught the strap that hung at the canvas. The strap tore with a sound like a stitch giving. Grant kicked. The man dropped and did not rise. Keen's voice carried from somewhere behind them, loud and raw now, no cord in it. Martial boots thudded. The sound cut off. Elijah looked up once. His eyes found Grant's badge and then Nora's face. He returned to Lila and did not look away again. Pike counted a slow rhythm with the tip of his finger on Lila's wrist. Nora cradled the mask and watched the flutter in the throat. The air smelled of smoke and horse and the clean cold of night. The canvas above them snapped as the wagon took a turn. They reached the alley mouth. A hydrant squatted there, iron and red. A fire line ran from it, fat with water. Spray arced into the air and came down in a shining veil. For a heartbeat, the wagon passed through that veil. Droplets broke on Nora's sleeves and face. They tasted of iron and pipe. They cut the soot and left clean streaks where they ran. Lila's chest hitched. It stopped. Pike's hands moved without hurry, but with no spare motion. He pressed at the sternum, found a point, pressed again. Nora pinched the mask to seal better and gave a full breath. Elijah set his palm over his daughter's hand and held it there, not to force anything, to keep closeness. 1 beat. 2. The chest moved under Pike's hand. A breath came small, then larger. The pulse under Nora's fingers picked up and tripped once before finding a lane. Grant dropped the canvas flap to cut the wind. The street narrowed. Lamps rushed by like slow stars. The coin in Elijah's pocket struck, and the sound found its way into the rhythm of the wheels on the stone. They took the long way through back lanes, where the wagon wheels left shallow moons in wet clay. The bell noise faded. The city settled into its night voice. Pike kept count with a fingertip on the pulse in Lila's wrist. Nora held the mask and watched for the small hitch that meant the chest would forget, then helped it remember. Grant's man opened the gate behind the small clapboard house off Curtis Street. Pike hopped down and led them through the yard to a door that stuck at the bottom. Inside air held the faint smell of lye and old wood. White sheets still covered the furniture. A basin waited on a stand as if someone had set it down earlier and walked away. They carried Lila to a narrow bed in the front room where the light was good. Pike worked fast. He set a kettle on the stove. He stripped the mask and replaced the hose. He cleaned the contact points on Lila's scalp and left them alone. He drew a small dose from a bottle and pushed it gently. He looked at Nora and held up 2 fingers. She nodded and met his rhythm. Elijah stood at the head of the bed and smoothed hair back from his daughter's forehead. He did not speak. His mouth moved with words he kept for her and no one else. Grant sent his men back out and stepped into the room with his hat in his hands. Soot had traced a pale line at his jaw where he had wiped sweat. He watched the bed, then shook his head once like a horse shedding water and turned to the door. "Keen is in irons," he said. "Crow, too. Your paper sits in my pocket. Your coin is with it." Elijah reached into his vest and found the silver as if checking that sound against the one in Grant's voice. The coin was still there. He looked at Nora. He put the dollar in her palm. "That bought time," he said. Nora closed her fingers around it. The metal took her heat and gave none. Vale slipped in with his cap crushed between his hands. He stood by the door and did not let his eyes land on the bed for long. "I told what I knew," he said. "Miss Doran knows where ledgers live better than she admits. She did not stop me." Grant nodded to him. "You walk out with me when the girl sleeps. You are under my hand until I say different." Vale swallowed and said yes. Steam climbed from the kettle and curled a ghost finger at the ceiling. Pike poured hot water into the basin and tested it with his wrist. He dipped a cloth and handed it to Nora. She wiped soot from Lila's face, then from her own hands. Clean came up slow. When the cloth cooled, she dipped it again. Steam fogged the small mirror above the stand. She wiped a circle clear and saw herself and the girl on the bed and the man who would not move from the head of it. Lila's eyes opened the way doors do when a draft finds them. Brown found the ceiling, then the window, then faces. She blinked, not at pain, at brightness. Elijah, she said again, softer, but there was more air in it this time. He leaned close. He put his forehead to hers for the briefest touch. He pulled away and sat tall. His shoulders let go a fraction. Pike set the watch on the quilt where he could see it without thinking and turned the hands to mark a minute. He rolled tiny pills in a twist of paper and set them aside. He rubbed his thumb on the bridge of his nose and left a clean streak. She will need quiet, he said. Small sips, warmth, no jostling. Nora nodded. She poured water, held the cup to Lila's lip, and watched the swallow the muscles move once, twice. Boots scuffed on the porch. Grant opened the door. Miss Doran stood there with a ledger under her shawl and no expression at all. This belongs with officers, she said, and put the book in Grant's hands. Keep your noise down. The city is half awake and useless when riled. He grunted thanks. She gave Nora a small look, almost approval, then left. A colder silence settled after they were gone. Outside, a wagon clattered on the street and faded. Somewhere far off, a dog barked exactly twice. Snow did not fall, but it was in the air, waiting a taste on the tongue. Nora sat by the bed with both hands wrapped around the cup. The dollar lay on the table, its face caught in a stripe of lamplight. She tapped the edge with a fingernail and listened. The sound was thin and clean. It did not sound like the stockyard. Elijah took the chair on the other side. The lines at the corners of his eyes had softened. He let his shoulders touch the chair back and kept one hand where Lila could find it without effort. Drink, Pike said, and Nora did. The water had a hint of copper from the pipes. It was honest. Grant stood in the doorway with Vale at his shoulder. He tipped his hat to the room. Sleep, he said. My men are on the street. Elijah nodded. Pike shut the door behind them. The house breathed in a slow-way wood, loosening heat rising in the stovepipe, the faint tick of the watch. Nora refolded the blanket over Lila's hip and pulled it smooth. Lila's eyes moved again. They found Nora. There was a question there that did not ask for words. You are safe, Nora said. Lila's mouth tried a smile and got a corner of one, which was enough. Her eyes closed. Elijah looked at Nora and then at the coin. He reached across and pushed it to the center of the table where both could see it. We will not need that sound again, he said. Nora nodded. The basin had gone cool. She carried it to the window and tipped it into the little garden. Water dropped to the dirt and made dark spots that held a circle before the ground took them in. She set the basin back and watched the glass fog under her breath and clear again. Pike dozed in a chair with his chin on his chest and woke himself when his head clicked back. He checked the watch and the rise at Lila's ribs. He did not write anything. He had numbers in his head and kept them there. Nora sat. Elijah watched. The room held. Outside, the city slept in pieces. The white sheets in the hallway moved a little in the draft like sails tied to their posts and waiting. The coin cooled on the table. Lila slept with color back in her lips and the soft tone of a healthy breath. The kettle sighed once and fell quiet. The mirror showed the three of them, small and true. They walked. The light changed. The day went on. The line of them stayed together. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.